The N word is a historically and racially charged word. In this episode of The Uncomfortable Truth, we're going to explore its historical context, why and how it is used today, and finally, who can use it. As a warning to our listeners, and this should be obvious, the N word will be used quite a bit in historical context or when quoting someone else. This is definitely going to charge some people up, and we know that, but stay with us. We hope this conversation will be helpful. This is Loki Mulholland, and it's time to get uncomfortable. Well, today we're joined by our usual contributor to the show, freedom rider and civil rights activist LaVon Brown. LaVon, how you doing?
Hello, Loki. How are you?
Doing good. Doing good. So the N-word.
Well, I think it's historical, and I think it's generational. Um, I for one don't allow the word in my house, but I talk to my nephews and whatever who are younger, and they think they're saying something different than when they say nigga, Niggah, and nigger, Nigger. To me, they sound the same. And so my relationship to the word, however one spells it, is as it has a negative connotation,
Mm-hmm.
and generally is the word you hear to put people of color down,
Right.
particularly African Americans. So I'm opposed to the word, no matter how it's spelled. A lot of people use it, a lot of comedians, a lot of singers, but I go back to how the word was originally used, which is to say you're less than. I personally am opposed to it. And interestingly enough, I'm opposed to saying the N word only because it allows one to say nigger without saying it.
Mm.
Um, and I think I think it's just a way to hide saying the word. That's just me.
But I mean, you're not going to get people walking around going, "Well, he's an N-word." I mean, using the word N-word.
No, you don't.
But if you're going to say, if you're going to go, well, why was this offensive? You know, like let's say you're in some working situation, and well, what happened? Well, he called me the N-word. I mean, that's just a way of saying it without having to actually say it. It's like saying, well, he dropped an F bomb.
Right. Exactly.
And are we diminishing it when we, I'm just thinking from a work environment or whatever, or school environment. Well, what happened? Well, he used the N word. Well, by saying that, did you automatically diminish its impact when you're reciting what he said or she said? So, well, why don't you just quote them and say, well, look, they said this.
Right.
And it's like, oh my gosh, okay. Now all of a sudden, I mean, because it's a word that hopefully, I mean, for most people, is a corrosive and grating word.
Well, it's a funny word because black people feel they have a right to use it. Nigga with the right? He's my nigga. He's my, where you going, nigga. It's like it becomes a matter of speech. The problem is they're using a very negative term to define the person. And secondly, you take something away from it when you tell, well, the white person can't use it. All right, I'll go along with that. The problem with that I have with that is it is used in music, it is used in song, it is used everywhere. So how can you say that somebody can't? Right? Now other groups do that. They do that. They use negative terms to define themselves, but only among themselves.
We're going to jump into that. So yeah, I want to go down this little bit of history road here, but I don't want to dive into the etymology of the word and such. But this historical usage. So there was this article by Brandon Simeo Starkey. He wrote a very moving piece in 2017 about the N word on undefeated.com, and it was titled, "If you truly knew what the N word meant to our ancestors, you would never use it."
Hmm.
And he writes that it is a reflection of internalized oppression. Reading back through interviews of former enslaved people these were interviews that were conducted by the Federal Writers Project of the WPA
Okay.
in the 1930s, he found story after story of this. He wrote, quote, "The internalized oppression revealed itself in various ways. Sometimes the former enslaved people clearly, perhaps subconsciously, considered themselves subhuman, just like how their former owners regarded them. Jim Allen, for example, dubbed himself his master's pet nigger boy and a stray, and thought
Mm.
himself privileged because he could sleep on the floor beside his master's bed. That he likened himself to a fortunate mangy mutt or frisky feline crushed me. The word laid bare a worldview that held black folk as a lower order of being, as when Irene Robertson claimed her former master, Mr. Sanders, was mean, in part because he beat his wife like he beat a nigger woman. He wrote that the word, quote, signaled antipathy towards fellow black folk. He continues, quote, it exists within black speech now because it existed within black speech then. The uncomfortable truth must be confronted. Absent the internalized oppression of those who called white men and women their masters, nigger would probably not be a part of black folks' lexicon.
Mm.
Internalized oppression. That's an interesting.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because that is when I was a kid, we used the word a lot, but we never used it to mean anything good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when we call somebody a nigger, we meant it in the negative sense of the word. Now we would use it, but that's how we would use it. It never meant good, and it has never in the history of this country meant good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I like internal oppression because I think that's what it is. We One of the reasons that we use that word a lot now with the AH is because presumably you've taken ownership of the word
Mm-hmm.
and taken the sting out of being called that.
Right.
So now, and that is internal oppression.
But it's taken away the history of it as well.
Yes. And it is no reason, it is one of those words, there's never a reason to use it.
Now, there's a film about your friend Jimmy,
Yeah.
James Baldwin, called
Right.
I Am Not Your Negro.
Right.
That's not what he said.
Right. Right. You said, I'm not your nigga.
Right.
Right.
Interesting that they would change the title.
Well,
Right.
because, right, to sell the book.
Right. But so what was Baldwin's getting at by saying that?
That you don't own me, that nobody does.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not, you cannot speak of me. If you speak of me in good terms, you cannot use that word. In any context, that is bad. And that's what he meant. That's what he was talking about. How can you say nigger and mean anything? It never meant anything good. The fact that you now have taken possession of the word, Richard Pryor, of all people, right? When he went to Africa and came back, he said, I can't use that word.
Mm.
And all the comedians used that word. And he came back and said, I made a mistake.
Wow.
I can't use that word. The Muslims, the black Muslims, they're not my people, but they never use the word nigger. There's never a reason to use it except for this term, what is it? Internal racism or
Internalized oppression.
that's the only reason to use it. That's the only reason. It never means good.
In my other life, I'm a filmmaker, and one of my more fascinating films I created is the award-winning film titled Black, White, and Us. It's about viewing racism through the lens of transracial adoptions in Utah. Utah? Yeah, Utah. It just so happens to be the transracial adoption capital of the world. So what happens when white families who didn't believe racism existed anymore adopts a black child? Find it on Amazon Prime or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection. So there was a bit from Dave Chappelle that circulates on the internet. It relates to a story when a network executive said he couldn't use a homophobic slur, and he questioned her on it and asked why can I use the N-word with impunity, but this slur used with the LGBTQ community, but I can't use.
Mm.
And the response was, because David, you're not gay. To which he said, well, Renee, I'm not a nigger either.
Wow. I didn't hear that. Yeah.
But again, it comes back just like with James Baldwin. Here it is. So here's this executive. I'm going to assume they're white. This white woman who is saying, hey, well, wait a second. You can't use this word. You can't use the word faggot because you're not gay.
Right. Right.
He's like, well, guess what? I'm not a nigger either.
Right.
However, she thinks it's okay for him to use that because how does she see him?
Right. Oh. Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily consciously.
No, I understand. Right. Well, or you have been given permission to use that word.
Right.
In other words, the other members of your community said it's okay to use that, and as white people, we're not offended by it. It's an offensive term, but you can use it because that's how I think of it as other black people using it. So it's okay for you to use it. Now, if you were gay, you could say faggot.
Right. So Charles Pearson, he's a fellow freedom writer.
Right.
I asked him once, what did the N word mean to him? And he said, they used to hang N words. That's what it means to me.
Right.
And so what does it mean to you?
About the same, because to me, anytime I heard that word, it meant that something was about to happen.
Mm.
And if a white person said it, it meant I could get killed, I could get hanged, but I have just stepped out of my place in society.
Right.
I am less than, and I'm acting like more than. So I'm going to put you in your place by calling you this.
Mm.
Right? That's what it meant. And so it still does. It still means that.
There's still a trigger for you.
Oh, it is. It is. And I don't allow it because of what it does to me. Now, people can say, well, it doesn't mean that. Of course it does. It's pronounced the same way. It's the same word. And you don't mean, I don't know if, let me back up. I don't see how you can mean anything positive by it. Because to me, it's a dangerous word. It's a hurtful word. And we have all kinds of words to use instead of that. So why do you choose that one?
Right.
And black people choose it because in some cases it's just they have internalized the oppression historically and now. And using the word does not change the meaning. It still means the same thing. And your use of the word does not make you better than. But that's what you're saying without meaning to. That's what the word always meant. I'm better than you. Here's the term, my nigga.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You all right with me because you're my nigga.
Right.
What did you just say? You own me. It's very difficult to explain to people, particularly young people. And my thing on it is, if I can say it, you can say it. And you don't know, I don't know, when you mean it and when you don't. In other words, when you're putting me down and when you're not.
Right.
I don't know that about a black person either. I've just said they're going to use it, so it's okay. Italians use guinea, wop, they use that. They say that to each other.
Mm-hmm.
We're not allowed to say it. But you don't see it in poetry. You don't hear it in the music. You don't hear it on radio. You hear it in verbal speech.
Well, and it's interesting, when you talk about music and video and so forth, these are products that are sold, and the main audience are white kids.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, the N word is something every African American at some point in their life is going to be called. It's usually when they're young and don't understand the word, and then that child is sat down and their parents have to explain it to them.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's a crushing experience because while the parent went through it and knows the pain, they hope their child never has to do it.
Right.
And then it happens.
Right.
Do you remember the first time you were called the N word?
That I was?
Yeah.
Wow. No, I don't.
Mm.
Interesting enough. Actually, the first thing I remember, it was a black guy that used the word.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when I was young, when I was little, like 7, 8 years old, when I used to go to my grandmother's, used to hear it all the time
Mm-hmm.
from black and white because black people put themselves below white people, right?
Right.
So it was not unusual to hear I'm just a nigga
Right.
or I'm Mr. Charlie's nigga. It was not unusual to hear that.
This is not slave days. This we're talking
No.
the 1950s and 60s,
Oh yeah. Oh
and they're saying, "Well, I'm Mr. Charlie's nigger."
right. Oh yeah. I wouldn't doubt. They used to. I tell you when I did also heard it was in jail when we were in jails during the freedom rides when they put us in jail.
Right.
That's what the trustees were. When I was on the county farm, the guy was that's what he was. He was a nigga.
Hmm.
Not everybody, but he was. And he referred to himself that way. It was painful. I didn't because I had a whole bunch of people telling me not to do that.
Right.
But growing up, I used it. I heard it, and it never meant anything good about me
Now, if you used it, you were using it against someone else in a negative sense. Then,
in a negative sense.
all right. Do you remember the first time it happened with your daughter?
Yes, vividly.
Okay.
She was maybe 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
5 years old maybe, and we were in New Mexico,
Hmm.
and we were staying at this place, the Bishop's Lodge, and we came back. They had a children's program there,
Mm-hmm.
and my wife and I went off for the day. We put our daughter in the children's program, and when we came back, the girl who was in charge of the children's program called us over and said, "This little boy," she pointed out the little boy, "referred to your daughter as nigger."
Hmm.
Now my daughter didn't understand what that was
Right.
because that's the first time she had heard it. So my wife was very upset by it. And I said, because I'm wise,
Mm-hmm.
let's just hold up a minute and see what the parents do. Because the parents may come over and apologize for that little boy saying that. Because he's young, he's maybe 7. So where did he get it from? Well, the parents never came over to apologize. And I said to my wife, now I know where he got it.
Did they know that he said it?
Yeah, oh yeah, it was
Okay.
reported out. It was
Okay. Okay.
reported out to us and to them that your son just called, let's call this little girl a nigger,
Mm-hmm.
referred to her as a nigger. And I expected the parents, I knew that the parents would come over and say, we're sorry about this, we don't know where he got this, or whatever. And I was perfectly willing to accept
Yeah.
that the kid must have gotten it from somewhere else. They never came over. The next day, the woman who ran the place, Mrs. Thorpe, threw them out.
Mm.
And she came to us and she apologized and she said, there's no place for people like that here. And that was the first time that my daughter was referred to that way. And I explained to my daughter what had happened, but I mean, like I said, it was all new to her. But that was the first time.
After that, was there a change?
For my daughter, um, not then. But later on, there was because I had to explain to her, or at least I felt I had to explain to her what that meant, and that she might hear it again,
Right.
and that it might come from the school she go to, or the police might pull her over, but she would hear the word again, or she might hear it again. But as she grew older, I sat her down and I explained to her where that came from. So in my house, or in my daughter, you will never hear that word.
But now, I mean, I'm just trying to understand this a little bit. But did you did you ever have to constantly sit there and think, okay, at some point I'm gonna have to explain this to my daughter?
No, it's not. No, it to me it was. Here's a kid that needs to know this,
Right. But I mean, living in the world that we live in,
right?
knowing that at some point this is gonna happen.
Right,
You hope it doesn't happen, but you know it's going to.
right.
Wouldn't you preemptively prepare your child for something like this?
I did. I talked to her about it.
Well, you said you talked to her after the fact.
Not then, not when she was. No child is going to understand at 5 years old all that can happen to them. When my child was like 12 or 13, we went south. I took my daughter where I grew up,
Uh-oh.
and I explained to her neighborhoods. I
Mhm.
explained to her where the pool was. I explained why we couldn't use it. I explained to her that what was different because some things were, but she understood that, and I made sure she understood. Now it was her choice because she was a mixed race child.
Mhm.
It's her choice when she gets older to pick which way she wants to go in the world. I mean, not by color, but by identity. But be prepared for anybody in this country who does not look like a white person is a black person.
Right.
And you should have friends of all colors.
Mhm.
But in the largest society, you are black and you may be called a nigger. What does that mean? So I explained to her. And I explained to her also why I didn't like it, whether it was AH or ER. I didn't care. So my daughter to this day, she's conscious of it, but she doesn't walk around thinking about it. Uh, but she does know that the police might treat her differently, and she now hears all the stories about what has happened to black men. So she understands. It's not news to her.
Mhm.
But we used to, when she would come home from school when she was young and talk about color, at her age, like she was at 5 or 6 years old, we would talk to her that people could be different but be okay.
My work has taken me to a lot of places, and I've been fortunate to meet some incredible people. But when I came to Selma and met Joanne Blackman Bland, I knew I was in the presence of greatness. Joanne was 11 years old when she was attacked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday in 1965. She wasn't old enough to vote, but understood its importance enough to be there. After Selma is an in-depth look at how our right to vote has eroded since the signing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The fight for the right to vote continues. Get informed. You can find After Selma on Amazon Prime or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection. White parents don't typically teach their children this word.
They don't.
We don't sit them down and explain that you don't say this. I mean, I honestly can't even recall ever even telling my kids not to use it. It's just
Right.
assumed. And of course, because the word doesn't impact us, we're not thinking about how that word can impact others. And so it rarely, if ever, even crosses our mind. I actually asked my mother if she ever talked to us about it, and she said she didn't. She also didn't talk to us about cursing, is what she
Right.
said.
Right.
But we very quickly understood those words weren't going to be used in her house, and we'd be reprimanded for it. In fact, she said there was a time so I'm an identical twin, and there was this another set of twins, these black kids who moved in somewhere in the neighborhood, and they came over to play. So two sets of twins together, isn't that nice? And we had some other friends there and stuff, and we're all climbing around the bunk beds and stuff, and then one of the brothers, the black kids, called his brother the N word,
Right.
and everyone went silent
Right.
because they knew it was coming next, and it was my mother. Because moms, they can hear anything anywhere.
Yes, that's
Um,
true.
she came right up the stairs, and she told the boys that we don't use that word in our house, and if they were going to use it, that they couldn't play here anymore. This was, and she said this was true for any derogatory term.
Right. But here's the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So those parents that I just told you about in New Mexico,
Right.
so they might have said to their kid, "We don't use that word," but are they explaining it from the point of view of it's wrong, or we just don't use it?
Or we just got caught.
Right there, exactly. There's a difference. And many parents who are white, once they've heard their child use it, they will still think of me as less than. You're just not supposed to say that. Other parents will say, we don't use derogatory terms about anybody.
We're not going to tell you what those terms are, but we're just not going to use them, so figure it out for yourself.
We don't use them. So if I hear you say nigger, I'm going to tell you that's a derogatory term. You don't use that.
Right.
Uh, so there's a difference in how white parents talk to their kids about it.
I mean, I asked my mother if the N word was ever used at home when she was growing up, and she said, well, yeah, her mother used it quite frequently. And we can quickly, assess. And obviously, my grandmother was a segregationist and so forth. So, okay, well, that makes sense, right?
Right.
She doesn't ever recall. She doesn't ever actually recall her mother calling the gardener or the cleaners, the help, right?
Right. Right.
The N word. But she said that Paul, who was the gardener, who was way older than my mother, was referred to as boy,
Oh yeah.
but never directly to him.
Right.
And she never addressed him by his last name.
Right.
And essentially, my mom to this day can't tell you the last names of anyone of color who worked for them.
Right.
Has no idea what their names are, except for
I can understand that because growing up, that's what happened in our neighborhood. Most people did not have a last name. Now, when you got old enough, you might stop being boy, but you became uncle.
right,
So
auntie or
yeah, or auntie, that was what you were called. You didn't have a name,
yeah,
so they didn't say it nigga, but it meant the same thing.
right. Now, my mother, she said she didn't know the N word was a bad word until she was 13.
Really, because you heard it all the time.
Because it was, she said it was as common as dirt. She said she recounted a story that one night, a dog was barking, and someone on the porch said to someone else, "What's your dog barking for?" And the reply was very nonchalant. "Oh, was this probably some nigger walking by?"
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
It's amazing to think how the word could become such an everyday part of one's vocabulary that they don't even think about it. So when I was a kid, we played a game where we would knock on someone's door and then run away.
right, right,
Now, we had a term for that, and it was nigger knocking.
right.
I didn't think twice about that for years
Of course not.
because that's just what I was told it was called. And I never associated that word with anything else,
Right, right,
right? And the more complex meanings until much later in life. So I was talking to a friend of mine who was an educator here in Utah, and he said, well, here they call it something like doorbell ditching, right? So I guess, that's,
right,
a little, alliteration, right?
right,
Um, Now, being in the South, my term would almost seem expected of white people to use that. But this guy, he grew up in rural Idaho,
mm,
and he said they used the same term that we used,
right,
right?
right,
But he never even met a black person until he was in high school.
right.
And yet, even though there was no black people there, they still had this term. I mean, that's how it got spread amongst white communities. I mean, it's amazing to think about. Just how common that term is to be used amongst whites.
Well, it was. Think a minute that during the time, historically, during the time of slavery, and even just after slavery, there were black people all over the place.
Right.
They were predominantly used in places where they grew cotton or farms,
Sure.
but niggers were everywhere. So the term was as common as dirt. Uh, so I would imagine that in Idaho, which is like full of right wing people, by the way,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
it would be a big term out there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's so in the award-winning film "An Ordinary Hero," it's interesting. My mother uses the term "Niggertown,"
Right.
and she uses that because she says that on a dare they went to Niggertown because
Right.
that's what it was called
Yep.
in Oconee, Georgia.
Yep.
And oftentimes when I'm watching the film with others, black members of the audience seemingly take it in stride.
Yes.
It's the white audience that squirms.
Right. Yeah.
Am I going to be in trouble?
Exactly.
Because suddenly this is being used, and I'm in an audience that I'm not comfortable hearing this in. Because
Right.
so I remember when we released the film on PBS here in Utah, they had an issue with the usage of the N word.
Yeah. Right.
So they formed a multicultural committee to review the film, and when they all sat down, I know Janetta Williams from the NAACP here in Utah was one of them in this committee, and we all sat down. They said, "Well, you can't take that out. It would sanitize the whole meaning of what was said."
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they actually ended up bleeping the word pissed off. So when you said, suppose I suddenly pissed off this white woman, they had all kinds of ways to do me in, and there's nothing I could do about it. So they were hung up on the N word. So because they had to, it was advised to keep that in, they had to find something to take out. So
Right. Took out pissed off.
yeah, now this was this is an overreaction of sorts to me,
Right.
not just the
Right.
pissed off, but deleting the N word. But I'm glad they thought enough to actually examine if the word should be bleeped. But at the same time, they didn't consider the context.
The a lot of people have lost their jobs. Not a lot, but a significant number of people have lost their job when trying to when using the word nigger.
Hmm.
And I think that's the academia is the first place that I think that N word was used
Right.
because it was a way to discuss being called a nigger without saying nigger. So you said the N
Hmm.
word. And I think it was in academia where that got started. I could be wrong because I don't think people on the street are going to think of it one way or another. Uh, but I think that's where that got started. It would allow the people in academia to discuss it. So, white people especially. See, they
Right.
don't know what to do with the fact that if I, as a black person, use the word nigger,
Hmm.
when all the comedians broke loose on the stage with this word, people didn't know what to do with it. It gave permission to hear it and to laugh at it, but not to use it. If I can say nigger
Hmm.
or the N word, I don't care how I say it, and you can't in mixed company, something's wrong.
An Ordinary Hero was my first award-winning documentary. It's about the life of my mother, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, and her participation in the civil rights movement. For most of us, our mothers are heroes because they're mothers, and mom is just mom. But when your mother's a civil rights icon, and yet you never really knew it, things change. Go check out An Ordinary Hero and find out how choosing to do what was right instead of what was easy helped change the world. You can find it on Amazon Prime, or visit LokiMulholland.com to purchase a copy for your collection. Well, there's this idea that by using the word, you're taking ownership. You're taking the ownership,
Right.
and thus, you're giving it your own meaning and so forth, and so now you're neutralizing it. But I mean, it's not my place to say that, I'm offended by that or anything. I'm not offended by it. I don't quite get the logic of it because while you can say you can own it, suddenly if a white person uses it, and you want to neutralize the meaning and so forth, but then when a white person uses it, whoa, wait a second, it still has meaning.
Right. If that's the case,
Then no one use it.
either that or use it among yourselves. Don't let me hear it. Don't let you hear it. We're on the street or we're in a group of all black men.
Yeah,
Fine, knock yourself out.
right.
But don't get up and tell jokes with that.
Yeah. Well, so well, in my film Black, White, and Us, right? So Jeffrey Mann, who's this young black guy, in college, he says that he hears the N word used a lot amongst white kids um, all the time. But when he confronts them about it, again, they're always like, "Well, no, it's the soft A
Right.
or AH," and so
Right.
that's different, right?
Right.
So a friend of mine in Virginia, he's an educator. He's African American, lives in Richmond. He told me that the N word has different meanings depending on when it's being used and by whom. Growing up, he heard his father and uncles use it when they got together, but he was told to never say the word around white folks because then they think they'll be able to use it.
Right. Okay.
He said he might use it at a barber shop, but he's never going to use it at work.
Right.
He said once you give them, white people, once you give them the idea that they can use it, they're going to use it.
Of course.
So you had a situation where Jesse Jackson was one of the people who called for a moratorium on the use of the word, but then he was caught using the word with a live microphone during a private whispered conversation.
Right.
And it's like, wait a second. And that's how white people are looking at it, going, wait a second. You just said, let's not use it, and then you used it. Now, that private conversation was probably with, another African American.
I'm sure it was.
But is it okay? So if we're talking about who can use it, is it okay when using it in an academic context like we're doing here or a documentary?
I think you have to.
Or is it really based on how you use it? or who is saying it?
Well, for two things. I think it has to be discussed, and it has to be given the power that it has. And you can only do that by discussing what it is.
Hmm.
So I think it's fine for people to do that, to discuss that. It's a part of history. It's what we were called. So I think it's fine for academia or people to discuss that and what it means.
Right.
I think that's fine. I think if you feel that you have a need for this word, then do it among your friends. But as soon as you start putting it in the music or in the song or in the comedic acts or any of that, I've given you permission to use the word.
Is there some ironic sort of way that perhaps when white people use it, reciting lyrics or whatever else, it's a way of showing that you're not racist because you're not using it in a racist way. So hey, look, it's okay.
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think when you're young, you get away with using words that are taboo, and that's just another word that is.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think that kids of whether they're black, white, or whatever are going to do that because they've heard it.
Right. But of course, when you tell a white person you can't use it, they start losing their minds, right?
Of course they do.
And the arguments ensue. Well, why is it okay for you? What if there's something else subconsciously going on? Perhaps create that argument as a way of asserting dominance, right?
Well, the problem is you can't. The problem is you don't know the difference.
Right.
In other words, if I'm not talking directly to the person, I don't know whether they mean nigga in the sense of I got control over you or nigga, we're in this together.
But what I'm saying is that if a white person, so a black person says to the white person, you can't use this word,
Right.
right? And so the white person asserts their dominance by saying, who are you to tell me that I can't use this word? You use it. If I can't use it, then you can't use it. So it's an interesting play, particularly with a word that is about subjugating people and less than.
If we change one word in that, it's okay. I can't use it and you shouldn't use it, as opposed to you can't use it.
So there was this professor, Neil A. Lester, who was with the Arizona State University. In 2011, he did this interview with Teaching Tolerance. Um, he taught 2 courses on just this word.
Okay.
He sees the word as, quote, laden with complicated and contradictory emotional responses to it. African Americans can use the word in intimate conversations and seemingly own it and contain it, but once it's out there, it takes on a life of its own.
Right.
So Professor Lester notes that white kids are the biggest consumers of rap music, which contains the N word, so they become very comfortable using it amongst their white friends and even their black friends who confess that they don't want to hear it from their white friends.
Right.
Right. This, of course, creates conflict, he says. Quote, we also cannot pretend that there is not a double standard, that blacks can say it without much social consequence, but whites cannot. There's a double standard about a lot of stuff. There are certain things that I would never say. And my relationship with my wife, who is not African American, I would never imagine her using that word no matter how angry she was with me.
Right.
I mean, your wife is white,
Right.
or as you phrased it, Italian. Um,
my wife is white. She's also Italian.
she's also Italian. I mean, she would never call you that.
No, she wouldn't.
No.
But not because it's interesting though, but it's not because I've stopped her. She just wouldn't use the word.
So Ta-Nehisi Coates, in 2017, he explained the N-word at a discussion hosted at the Evanston Township High School in Illinois. He noted that it's normal in our culture for different groups to use words that others can't. He can call his wife honey, but it wouldn't be acceptable to call a strange woman that.
Right.
His father was known as Billy back home, but Coates said it would be awkward for him to call his father by his nickname. Right.
Right.
And he continues, my wife, with her girlfriend, will use the word bitch. I do not join in.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I don't do that. I don't do that. And perhaps more importantly, I don't have a desire to do it.
Right.
In a bit of irony, White people created the N word but can't use it. And according to Coates, that rattles a lot of white people. Going back to the example of his wife and her girlfriends calling each other the B word, he would never assume that he can enter that domain, but for some reason, whites feel that they are entitled to enter African Americans' domain when it comes to the N word. He adds, quote, when you're white in this country, you're taught that everything belongs to you. You think you have a right to everything. You're conditioned this way. It's not because your hair is a texture or your skin is light. It's the fact that the laws and the culture tell you this. You have a right to go where you want to go, do what you want to do, be however. And people just got to accommodate themselves to you. And so now, here's this word that's been taken from us, meaning whites.
Right. Well, the problem is, I don't know. I mean, I understand what he's saying,
Yeah,
but not. I can't go quite as far as he's going, because what is it that gave us as black people the right to use the word nigger?
right.
Who said that nigger was the right word to use? Who said that? So white people didn't say that. They meant exactly what they meant when they said my nigger.
Right.
Now you made the word cool, my nigger.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool now. You can say that. And you don't go around calling white people rednecks, peckerwoods, my cracker. You don't say that, right? Why not?
And white people don't say it to each other either.
No, of course not. No group does that. So I don't care. I mean, the fact that we've taken a word from white society and that's our own word, the word we chose was actually the word that put us down.
Mm,
And that's why so I don't care that a white person uses it. I care that they understand why it's being used.
right. And so Professor Lester actually says that in his interview with Teaching Tolerance, that teachers can address it with students by talking about language, about, quote, words and emotions, about words and pain. Consider the role of words in the brutal attack on Black people during slavery, during Jim Crow, during the Civil Rights Movement. Consider how words were part of the attack on Black people.
Right.
Just as Charles Pearson said, they lynched N words.
Yeah. I don't care that the white people want to use that word. I care that the word is for part of the English language still.
Mm,
And I care that they are nigger towns. I care. I don't want the word used at all, because Pearson is right. That's why they used it, because they were getting ready to hurt somebody. So now we're gonna internalize this hurt by calling each other nigger. I feel the same way about the word I do about the statues. Okay.
right.
I don't care if you feel that Robert E. Lee was a good general, was a good person, was all this stuff. That's your history. I don't care. I care that you know that Robert E. Lee also owned slaves. I care that you know that he also killed people. I care that you know who he was. So you leave the statue there, put a sign up that says, and he did this. So that's your history. That's also mine. You can't own that.
Yeah, so if you're going to use the N word, I want you to understand what it means.
Exactly.
Then you at least have a choice. Now you have a choice based on knowledge.
Exactly.
Want a great way to help a worthy organization and educate children about the civil rights movement? Visit our foundation, the Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation, at thejtmfoundation.org. That's thejtmfoundation.org. We are a 501c3 established to help end racism through education. A $5 monthly recurring donation will provide curriculum for 30 students. As my mother used to say, I can't do everything, but I can do something, because doing nothing is not an option. If you have wanted to help in this cause, but didn't know how, now you can. The Joan Trumpauer Mulholland Foundation at thejtmfoundation.org. So Coates, he concluded with it. He said, quote, the experience of being a hip hop fan and not being able to use the word is actually very, very insightful. It will give you just a little peek into the world of what it means to be Black. Because to be Black is to walk through the world and watch people doing things that you cannot do, that you can't join in and do. So I think there's actually a lot to be learned from refraining.
Well,
That's what he says. So,
I don't think you learn anything. You learn to use the word among your friends and not to use it publicly.
right. Yeah. Because,
That's
I
what
mean,
you
it's like,
learn.
well, yeah, going back, I mean, it's like, yeah. Uh, when I was growing up, did I curse? Yeah. Did I do it in the house? Oh, hell no.
Of course not. Right.
Right.
So that's all you learn.
Right.
And you learn, by the way, depending on who you are. So
Hmm.
if you're a person who uses the word because it's cool, or you person uses the word because you don't like black people,
Hmm.
you learn when to be circumspect about the word. So at the
Right.
Klan meeting, you can say nigga.
Right. At the grocery store, maybe
At the
not.
grocery store, you maybe not. That's all
Right.
you learn. And you learn that see that even nigga now I can't use
Right.
because of them.
Hmm.
So what did you learn? I mean, you don't learn anything.
Yeah.
You become frustrated. You become a whole bunch of things, but you haven't learned anything.
Yeah.
Because I didn't tell you why I don't want you using that word.
So Brando Simeon Starkey, he ends his piece in theundefeated.com with this statement, quote, I seek not to usher the word to the gallows. I harbor no aims to kill it. I can still bump a Young Thug track or chortle at a Dave Chappelle routine. Nigger does not bar my enjoyment of popular culture. My soul, though, winces whenever I hear it. The decision for black people to include it in their vocabulary nonetheless remains personal, and I reject the criticism of black folk who continue to wield it. I write only to summon the words of former enslaved people from beyond the grave to express that nigger is haunted by the ghosts of hate and the more spiritually chilling ghosts of self hate.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Hmm. Well, I think we could just end that on that note then, Levon.
Yeah, I do too.
All right.
It's just another part of history.
That still lives today.
Yep.
And the N word is probably one of the great embodiments of the past that we still see. And so we're not saying don't use the word, we're just saying understand it.
Yeah, understand the word. You'll stop yourself.
Right. Once you understand, you'll go, oh my gosh, I never want to use that word again.
All the good people will stop. Trust me. So that's my take on it. I just I think we need to talk about the word. I think educators, it's fine if they use the N word or whatever, but they understand what it does to people like me
Mm-hmm.
because I study history.
Right.
They don't.
Well, you were a part of history.
Well, that's true too. uh,
I mean, you're old enough now to say that. So,
I can say, yeah. Now that I know that I'm one of the old people that you're talking about, that is so funny. I'm telling you, I just didn't occur to me
What's that? That you're old?
that I was old because I was going I was going to get therapy because of the stroke,
Yeah.
and I said, "Well, what's the problem?" And they said, "Levon, you're over 65. You're over 75." I said, "Oh, I've got to be careful."
So my friend who lives in Virginia, he turned 45. This is the educator that we referred to earlier, and he turned 45. He goes, "So how you doing? Happy birthday, man! How's it going?" He goes, "Man, I must be getting old because my back hurts and it didn't hurt last night." He says, "You're getting old when you wake up worse than when you went to bed."
It's just right. I like that. He's right. Oh God!
Well,
All
stay
right,
safe,
man.
man.
Yeah, you too.
Appreciate you.
All right,
All
take
right,
care,
and
folks.
don't forget to call my mom.
I will. I
All right.
promise. All right.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you again for listening. Make sure you head to my Patreon page at patreon.com/Loki Mulholland. Show a little love if you can, and get access to even more content. Until next time, don't be afraid to get uncomfortable.